Hi, I'm Bill McLeod, your host for today's program, Joy in Our Town. You know, our program is always designed to bring you pertinent information and people in the community that are making a change. And today we're so happy to have back for a second time Craig Nippenberg. And Craig is a child therapist. He specializes in ADHD. He's with one of the largest practices in Colorado, Nippenberg, Patterson and Associates. And we're going to talk about a problem that so many people have these days or are concerned about, and that's with their children, and in particular, children who may not be as attentive as other kids, Craig, right? Yes. And suffer from ADHD.
Right.
Thank you. What is ADHD? Let's start with that.
That's a great question. And first of all, it's a privilege to be back on the show. I really enjoy it. And this is one of my favorite topics. So easiest way to think about it is what's called executive functioning. Or when I talk to children about this topic, I talk about the president of your brain. So if you imagine being able to look inside your brain, this part right up here is called your frontal lobe. Mm-hmm. And the frontal lobe is sort of the master controller of the brain. It's telling the rest of the brain what to do and when to do it. So it governs things like attention, paying attention. And that could be avoiding distractions. It could also be shifting away from something. So you'll have sometimes people who hyper-focus. They can't get off one thing and on to the next, right. Or they can't stay paying attention. Things like organization, what are you going to need, having your supplies together. Time management, being able to sort of estimate how long is something going to take. How long will it take me to get ready in the morning for a child? How long will it take them to get ready, to get dressed and be ready and out the door? Right, so time management, things like working memory, so pieces of information that come into your brain that you need to hold on for a short period of time to accomplish. So for the child, the parent says, now go upstairs, take your shoes upstairs, make your bed, and don't forget to put the books on the shelf, right? Now that little brain has to remember those three things until the job's completed, right?
Okay, but let me ask this. I have a teenager. He follows all of those, trust me,
is
he focused, is he getting up in the morning, is he staying on task? And so I think for a lot of parents, when do you be concerned?
And so if you think about this frontal lobe functioning piece, that everyone's on a spectrum. So we could all take the test for it. There are several different tests you can use. The females are generally going to be in about the 80th percentile. Females tend to do much better with the organization and impulse control. You go to any kindergarten classroom in the country, and what are the little girls doing? They're sitting still, they look nice, right? They're raising their hand before they talk.
Exactly.
Boys are in about that 50th percentile. So again, you go to any kindergarten classroom, most of the boys are touching their buddies, they're squirming in their seats, right? They're blurting out before they raise their hand. Then on the further end down here, if you're in about the 6th to 8th percentile on the test for that frontal lobe functioning, which also includes, by the way, impulse control and emotional control. So when you have emotions, you have thoughts or desires or things you want to do, that frontal lobe is supposed to say, stop, let's evaluate, should I do this or not? So it's all those master control things. And for people on that end of the spectrum, they're the ones that fall into the diagnosis of ADHD. Now, you're right about teens, and I think later we'll talk a little bit more about the teen brain, because there are changes in the teen brain where there's massive growth in the frontal lobe. And while it's developing and doubling in size over time, it really works a lot less. So you see a shift with all teenagers. They all start to look pretty ADHD, and I have a teenage son too.
Well, society today, it's not that we make light of it, but when somebody's kind of not focusing, you say, oh, I have ADHD, almost as a joke. And, again, not to make light of the problem, but so how does a parent differentiate between, I just have an unfocused child, or how do you go get tested to find out?
Yeah, and so sometimes, the first question is it just that they're not disciplined enough, they're a little bit lazy, they need to give more effort, they're learning how to be a student, right? Best place I find for parents is feedback from the teacher. That's generally your best source of information. So when your child's teacher says, compared to other children in first grade or other children in third grade, your son or daughter really seems to have a hard time staying focused, using their memory, controlling themselves in the classroom. And that's usually your best source of information, is when a teacher is telling you that. Could be the Sunday school teacher, the preschool teacher, but your school teacher is the one who's giving you information. Then you can go to psychologists, you can go to specialists to get testing done. You can talk to your pediatrician. At our office, we have a psychologist that does testing. There's various rating scales that will tell you where the child is on that. You also might want to look at full academic assessments, because other things can look like ADHD. So if a child's depressed, the first thing to go when you're depressed is your frontal lobe. You can't pay attention, you can't concentrate. It could be some other learning difficulties. So maybe the child's having some other learning issues, and a good thorough academic testing could help you figure that out and filter out out, is it ADHD, is it something else?
I look at my son. I always go back to my own kids every time
sure.
I talk to
I
you
do
about
too.
this too.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
you're always worried. Because I
Yeah.
come a little bit from the old school that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
should focus. You should be doing
Right.
these things. And are they not doing it just because they're a boy, they're a girl? My daughter's totally different. We've talked
Right.
about that
Yeah.
as well. But for a parent, isn't there's just a thin line here when you say you talk to your teacher? Okay. Are not sometimes gifted children maybe bored in class?
Sometimes gifted
Just
kids
the
are bored in
opposite.
class, right? And so that, again, some testing might tell you, where is this child? Are they in the gifted range? And maybe in the classroom they're in isn't a good fit for them. Maybe they need to be in a GT program. Maybe they need to go to one of the special schools for gifted kids where they can really sort of rock and roll.
Right.
Now, at the same time, you do see a high comorbidity with kids who are gifted but also have frontal lobe difficulties.
Okay.
So they do have a hard time paying attention and managing it, just like other kids who may also be in that range.
Tell us about these tests. I mean, what questions are asked?
Yeah,
How do you
they're
actually
basically,
determine it?
some of them are survey forms where parents fill them out, teachers fill them out, and they'll kind of, there's 10, 20 questions about what do they see with this child's behavior in the classroom. Are they sitting still? Are they able to pay attention? Are they organized? Can they manage time? Others are computer-based, where you have a child will look at a computer screen and are supposed to look for a certain number and then click the button every time that the number appears. And over time, then what happens for people with ADHD, they can't stay focused on it. So they can't do it's called continuous vigilance, and they can't stay vigilant, and pretty soon they're looking out the window or they're missing it, and so their scores then are much lower than the person with good attention who can really stay focused.
Okay, so let's assume we find out that our child is maybe has. I mean, there are different levels of ADHD.
There is.
Mild,
So again,
moderate?
if you think about a spectrum, so there's going to be kids who are just on the edge. They have sort of shadows of ADHD. They're not the best organized, and a few accommodations by the teacher in the classroom will be all that they need. So maybe you make sure Johnny sits in the front, right, and away from the window.
Right.
So you remember when you were a boy in school, if you
Right.
sat by that window by the playground, what happened to you?
You're not paying attention.
You're gone.
Yeah.
You're looking out the window.
I sat by the
right?
window.
Yeah, I did too. I always try.
Another story.
Or the back. If you sit in the back, what happens to you?
Right.
You
Not paying
you're
attention.
goofing around.
Right.
So it might be just some preferential seating. So there's simple things that might be done for that child. Then you're going to have children in the medium range and then children with severe range.
Okay.
And typically the kids are in the severe range. They sort of know it, and so does everybody else, right? I had a little boy once, I was teaching a 4th grade class about ADHD, and this young boy jumped up out of his seat onto the chair and said, "I have that." And I thought, that's a pretty good indication
Proud of
right
it.
there. Just by that, I think that's probably true.
Yeah, first step to recovery,
Yeah.
admitting
Yeah,
you actually have it.
when you admit it.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
Okay, so once we've determined that the child is moderate, extreme, whatever it may be, these kids can pose some challenges, if you will, for the family, for themselves, and for their peers.
Yeah, in lots of different areas. So if you just start with the family, so just think about the morning routine at your house. And you're supposed to leave at a certain time to get the kids ready for school, and the bus is coming, or you're taking them to school. And these are kids who every morning it's the same challenge of, they start to get dressed, the dog comes into the room, the next thing you know, they're playing with the dog. They come downstairs for breakfast, halfway downstairs they find an old Lego part, and the next thing you know, they're building Legos on the stairway, forgetting what they're supposed to be doing, not managing themselves.
Right.
So then we got the stress of trying to get out the door in school, the parents are upset and hollering, everybody's upset, right? The sibling without those problems, they're like, oh, this is a drag for them, right? ADHD kids too, again, because sometimes they are impulsive, and not all the kids have the impulsivity or hyperactivity. That's just some of them.
Okay.
Some it's just more attention. But for the kids who are impulsive, it might be blurting out at their sister at the breakfast table before school, saying something mean, some negative feedback or something, and then we've got the family problems again, right?
Okay, so we've determined their potential problems. Okay,
Yeah.
let's come up with solutions now.
Yes.
So some of the
Yes.
solutions that, there's tremendous strides being made
Yes.
in this area, are there not?
Yes, there are. And there's both what we would call internal solutions and external solutions. Now, I always recommend when I'm working with families, I want to start with some external solutions first. So good old-fashioned behavior management. So the rule of thumb is the less internal control your frontal lobe has, the more external control you need.
Okay.
So that family has to be really diligent about, a place for the backpack. And every night we have the same routine for homework. And every morning we have the same routine for getting ready. And we have posters. And we're constantly going over it. Now, if we handle this, then here's what happens. If we don't, then here's what the consequences are.
Okay.
So it's sort of good old-fashioned discipline, structure, lots of
Right.
structured functioning. They're not kids who do well with, flying by the seat of their pants and a chaotic family. They just really fall apart in that environment. So I do a lot of parenting work about how do we make things more structured for this child,
Right.
so it's more predictable. They have a better chance of succeeding with that external structure.
So these kind of sound like behavioral
Those would be behavioral
solutions,
interventions,
if you
yes.
will.
Behavioral solutions.
But society seems to want to drug or medicate
Yeah.
our children, like Ritalin. I mean,
And that would be what I would call an internal solution. So
Okay.
a medication that really is what the medications are basically doing is they're increasing the dopamine levels, which is one of our brain chemicals that the brain uses to communicate. The frontal lobe is rich in the dopamine system, and the stimulant medications, increase dopamine levels, and so that frontal lobe that wasn't really working or was sort of half on, 20 minutes later after they take the medication, it's working. And all of a sudden, you see this kid being able to pay attention, being able to sit still, get ready on time, control what they're saying or controlling what they're saying to their classmates, and you're seeing that frontal lobe functioning. So those are the medications, is sort of how they work. They've changed dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. There's been newer medications that have come out with fewer side effects. Most people are aware of Ritalin, which was sort of the first one that people were using. There are a couple other older ones. But they've come out with new generations of that. There's newer medications that last longer, like 10, 13 hours, so a student doesn't have to go to the nurse's office to get their pill and have the other kids know that they're taking a pill. There's a lot more treatment options from medication for it as well.
because as a parent, my concern is how long does a child have to be on medication? Is there a weaning process in this eventually?
It varies from child to child. In the old days when I was trained, they used to think that kids outgrew this by the time they were 16 or 18, and that's really not true. If anything, you might see kids, the hyperactivity decreases over time, but many times they'll still struggle into adulthood with attentional issues and the organizational issues, and may choose to continue a stimulant medication through adulthood. I see plenty of parents, a lot of it's genetic, and I'll see a lot of the parents are taking medication to help them with success in their business because it's just so difficult for them to manage their day-to-day life.
Right.
You'll have other kids who only take it during the school year. They don't take it, during the summertime. You might see some growth through middle school, and by the time they get to high school, they may be ready to they've learned some strategies, they've learned how to cope, they've learned systems for organizing themselves, and they may choose to stop taking it and see how they do. And I'll see high school kids who have stopped taking it for a while, and then maybe they've got a really tough, course load, lots of tough classes, AP classes, and they may take it again during that period just to kind of get that frontal lobe system bumped up again.
Well, and as you were just talking to, there's a difference. ADHD is ADHD regardless of the child, but there is a difference in the development of it because of it being a teenager, and that's going to change things. And I want you to hold your thought for 1 second on that, because in the next segment, let's you and I just kind of zone in, if we will, just specifically on teenagers, because as a father of two teenagers, I'm convinced they both have it on any given day. So I always want to make sure that everything's fine for my kids, and I know the viewers out there always want to make sure that they're doing everything that they can possibly do for their children to give them every opportunity. And there is a fear, I know, out there of medication versus behavioral. And I think as we talk about the teenagers in the next segment, we're going to have a lot more insight, if we will, on the problems and, more importantly, the solutions that the parents today can address with their children, especially when they are dealing with something as serious and as prevalent, if you will, in society today as ADHD is. We're watching Joy in Our Town, and we want to thank you so much for tuning in today and taking the time with us. We've got Craig with us back again, expert on ADHD. He can answer all your questions. We're really going to enjoy the next segment, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're watching Joy in Our Town.
This log. Yeah. Whoa! I like the big black ones. I like the brown wiggly ones.
I like the green crunchy ones myself.
Whoa.
Get out and explore nature. There's surprises everywhere. Go to discovertheforest.org.
Anyone up for dessert?
Welcome back to Join Our Town. I'm your host, Bill McLeod, and we've got back with us again for our second time in our second segment today, Craig Nippenberg. Sorry, Craig.
That's a tough
I'm
one.
having a problem
It is.
today. I really am. I'm just stumbling over the
Silent
words.
K.
Silent K, exactly. And Craig is with Nippenberg, Patterson and Associates, one of the largest practices in Colorado, specializing in ADHD amongst other things. And he's here with us today to kind of chat a little bit about ADHD. And we were talking in the first segment about kids having it, and now we're kind of progressing to those teenage years, which drive all us parents crazy at any given time.
Yeah, they can be a challenge.
They are a challenge. There's no question about it. So we expect a lot out of our teenagers, especially because it's that time they're supposed to mature and grow. But when a teenager has ADHD,
that's really important to think about it. We put a lot of stress on teenagers. Academically, the amount of homework kids get is exponentially higher than what we ever got. So there's a lot of academic pressure, there's a lot of homework, and their brain development, as we mentioned in the first segment, that brain development in the frontal lobe is expanding, and it really won't be finished growing until they're about 25. And it continues to speed up until you're about 35. So their brains really aren't fully developed to handle this massive load of work that they're getting and managing all their sports and activities. It's a very difficult time as those frontal lobes are starting to grow and expand. You do see with girls around the end of 8th grade, you see sort of a jump in maturity. For boys, it's about the end of sophomore year. They're still pretty much junior high guys.
Occasionally.
And occasionally later. But I saw a difference with my own son in junior year. We really made some strides academically and just in his own personal maturity and decision making. But for teenagers, you know, there's so many different areas of their lives that good frontal lobe functioning relates to. So if you just think about the emotional world of the teenagers, their emotional centers are twice as active as children or adults. Now those emotions, when they emerge from the system in your brain, lower down here in your brainstem, when those emotions come out, that frontal lobe is supposed to say, now stop, wait a minute, think about this. Is this really that big of an issue? What could I do? How can I solve this problem? But when that frontal lobe's not working, and especially for the teens with ADHD, then they often are very impulsive and do the first thing that comes to mind. So it might be, you know, starting a fight or something, right? Really not stopping and thinking about, hey, what's going on for me, right? Or getting in the car and racing off down the street. It could be excitement. So you get the teenager who's got ADHD, all excited to go out with the friends after the football game. They get invited into the car, they look in there, there's no seatbelts, right? Now what should your frontal lobe tell you to do?
Not get in the car.
Not get in that car. But guess what the ADHD teen does, or many teens who are on that spectrum.
Pull 5 more kids in
You
with
get
them.
5 more kids in there, and then you have an accident, and maybe that kid dies from it. There is some statistics about for teens with ADHD and children with ADHD. They have like 400 times the accidental death rate of other kids because they're playing kickball, they kick the ball out in the street. What are you supposed to do? Look both ways. They don't look both ways. They run right in the street. Goes up on the roof. They're the ones climbing up the gutter, right? Or driving the car.
So do kids with ADHD have a tendency to get in more trouble, let's say with the law?
Yeah, as teenagers you do see more legal involvement, particularly around the driving. ADHD teenagers have 4 times the accident rates, 4 times the number of tickets. So again, if you think about driving, it's a lot of concentration. You really have to be focused while you're out there driving that vehicle. You have to manage time. You got to figure out how fast are these cars coming at me before I make a left turn. And if that frontal lobe's not really engaged and really not working, you're much more likely then to have an accident. And again, it could be the impulsive behaviors, you know, the kids racing the cars, the first kid to step on the gas and race the car and then go off the road and have the accident, or maybe getting emotionally upset, starting the fights with other kids at school. So they do often have a higher rate of involvement with the legal system. You'll also see some of the teens will, over time, turn to medicate, you know, for alcohol, drugs, especially marijuana tends to be a problem with ADHD teenagers. But you'll see them turning to those things, and especially when you look at it, if you think about for all the years in school that these kids have struggled. So if you look at the research, ADHD students get 10 times the negative feedback of other students. So for every comment the teacher makes to Susie to please sit still, Bill here gets 10 times those comments. Now, after 16 years of school, how are you going to feel about yourself?
Your self-esteem's pretty low at that
pretty
point.
much, you're shot. You're done. You're pretty much done with school. You feel like you're getting nagged all the time. And as teenagers discover, things like alcohol and marijuana can really change how you feel. right? And can take you away from that emotional space.
So are these kids then doomed to be the class clown?
No, you know, I've got several. I work with a lot of the kids, and they're creative. I mean, the positive sides of ADHD, they're often very funny kids. They're creative. I see a lot of kids that are twice exceptional. They're very bright. They're quick thinkers. You know, can be very artistic. They often are the fire or the joy to the classroom, and they really can get things going. But if they're motivated and with the right structure that they need, often in high school, these kids do better in smaller class sizes, maybe need accommodations that testing can qualify them for, so maybe extended time on their tests, maybe less homework, fewer problems to do than, say, another student, because those things are the things that help them get through the homework and help them be successful in school. And I've had students who have been valedictorians of their class who had severe ADHD, and with the proper help and that structure, they were able to be quite successful.
So they have every chance to be successful. I mean, the viewer out there today with their child's worried about this doesn't have to...
You know, there are some statistics about adults with ADHD that aren't real attractive. Some of these same problems continue into adulthood with maybe the impulse control, personal relationships. You know, if you think about intimate relationships, you know, your spouse expects you to pay attention to them, and when you're talking to them and they say, "Hey, could you stop and pick this up on the way home?" and you show up week after week and you forgot, and you really were trying to remember and you forgot to get it, pretty soon your spouse starts to think that you don't care, right? So you see some struggles in the marital relationships. But a lot of the kids I see have gone in adulthood have done fabulous things. They really need to find the right setting for themselves. So a lot of the kids I see, you know, they do great with where they can be in like sales and they can be out there moving and they like action. If you wanted them to just sit still in a cubicle all day, they're probably going to have a hard time. Entrepreneurs, I have several friends who are entrepreneurs with ADHD, and they've learned to hire people, like good secretaries.
I would think they could multitask very well, too. I mean,
the problem is they never get quite finished. So they get started on numerous projects, but then they don't quite get any of them finished. And they need that sort of that German, you know, bookkeeper who comes in and makes sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted and all the details are taken care of.
So, one of the solutions is we're talking about when teenagers begin to grow and get older. Are the medications different for a teenager?
The medications are pretty much going to be the same for children, teens, and adults. It's just going to be the dosage is going to be higher because it's generally done by body weight, so the dosage is going to be a little bit higher. You'll also, with the teenagers, many times they do need to take maybe extra medication after school to get through the homework, or switch to one of the newer medications that last, you know, 12, 13 hours, because, you know, the younger child may need it just for school. They got 10, 15, 20 minutes of homework that you get through it with structure, you're fine. For those high school kids who are high achieving, excelling, they really need to have that medication working while they're studying. Many people feel too for the teens they should be taking it on the weekends if they're driving. So if they're behind the wheel, if they need medication to help them get to further enough up that spectrum to drive safely, then they should probably be in it on the weekends when they're out driving.
Well, and I think what happens with these kids too is they have this baggage that comes with them because society tells them, or their parents tell them, or therapist tells them, not that you're different, but you have an issue. And I mean, how do we help them understand that they're not different?
What I try to do is when I'm talking to students, I teach in some schools and I consult with the kids. I teach fourth graders. I do a whole year on the brain and help them understand the frontal lobe and how we're all different. We're all on the spectrum. There's reasons that we're on this spectrum, and how to be accepting of who you are and the gifts that come with it, and how to help your classmates so you don't feel like, oh, I've got this terrible thing and I can't be successful. That actually you can be successful. And I see we get some kids that are incredibly creative. Many times it's just helping them talk about it too. So we do groups in our office where we focus on social skills. A lot of the kids, again, with ADHD, they're impulsive, they blurt things out, they say things that are inappropriate, they get upset at the football game when they don't win, you know, they brag too much. I know, I do too.
With the Broncos, they're sure
with the
upset all
Broncos,
season.
yeah. Or if I'm playing a board game, I get a little upset.
It's called competitiveness too,
right.
Yeah.
But they struggle with it socially because they're giving negative feedback to other kids, and then kids don't maybe want to play with them, or they're not getting invited over. So we're working on social skills, but we're also working on those emotions of what it's like to feel to be different. What it's like when a teacher might say, "Oh, Johnny, did you take your pill at lunch today?"
Yeah.
And Johnny probably doesn't want the kids to know that he's taking a pill,
Right.
And so it's a lot of times helping them with the emotional side of it, or that they're struggling, that their sibling doesn't have ADHD, the sister's got all A's, and meanwhile the boy, there he is, and he's got the C's and D's, or maybe it's the sisters in that case who's struggling, and they see their sibling getting all the positive strokes, and they're having a hard time slugging it out through school.
Right.
So
Well,
it takes there's that emotional baggage that goes with it.
and a lot of it, just on a personal note here, I think it's important for children to have good self-esteem and confidence. And it is, what is your unique traits? Even with ADHD, you have unique traits. I mean, you're not missing a limb. You're not, you have something
You've
that
got
makes you
some
different.
unique traits. And again, you can be quite creative, and your mind works fast, and you think of things that other people don't think
Right.
of. If you can learn to channel it, you're going to be very effective. And when they do succeed, they feel great. Just before I came to the studio today, I was seeing a 4th grade child who's ADHD. I've been working with him on some behavioral strategies in the classroom. He just got his report card, and I wrote it down. I wanted to share it. I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm doing the best I've ever done. I've kind of figured it out. I figured out not to call out in class or interrupt, trying to sit still in class, and I'm looking at the teacher, and I've made friends with everybody."
Oh,
He
good.
was just pleased as could be, but he could see his progress in looking at the teacher, trying to sit still in class, using little fidget toys.
This is such an interesting subject, and it affects, I know, so many different people. And even if it doesn't affect it, sometimes we believe it does affect our children. I don't want to leave this without you telling everybody where they can get in contact with you, Craig.
Yes. In my office, they can go to our website. It's craignippenberg.com. There's a K on the front part of Nippenberg.
We'll get it out here
so
eventually.
craignippenberg.com. Another wonderful resource for parents is the CHADD organization, and it's chadd.org. They have an incredible website with a list of providers around the country, information for parents, everything you need to know about ADHD you can find on the CHADD website.
Well, you've enlightened the viewers so much today just with your knowledge, your information, and your experience, Craig. I'm so thankful you came back with us again and shared it with the viewers today, because it is something that I know affects so many different people out there. And sometimes we're just confused, does it or because we can't always put our hand on it. We can't touch it. But ADHD is it's a part of life. It doesn't have to be a problem. It can be a positive for so many people. Hopefully, like this show has been for you, a positive. We've hopefully enlightened you somewhere along the way today, and we thank you so much for taking your time of your day and tuning in to Join Our Town. Until next time, have a great day.